Well, here we are. Okay, yeah, let's do it. So today's featured movie, is a movie that has been featured after a series of movies and episodes in which I covered movies that kind of tended to be a little on the downside, if not devastating. And life itself, it can be devastating enough as it is. And so, if you are listening to this podcast, all one or two of you, I would like to ask you to maybe take one for the team, for your dear host this week. Please. We're going to talk today about a early 2000s teen romp. And yeah, I am going to analyze it as if I'm some sort of expert thespian, which I'm not. But it should be great. Let's go. All right, let's not get lost in too much info, but let's cover the basics, yeah? The Girl Next Door, the movie, it was released in 2004. Directed by a man, yes, a man. It had to have been directed by a man, named Luke Greenfield, who, up till this point, had a Rob Schneider movie, The Animal, to his credit. And in terms of cast, this movie really laid the groundwork for several actors. The leading man, our Orpheus, was played by Emile Hirsch, and he would later go on to be in the movie Into the Wild as the main character. And Emile wasn't the only one. We've also got Paul Dano. This was his breakout film. And he would later, he's basically in now a ton of movies, such as Little Miss Sunshine, and he was in There Will Be Blood, among many others. But if you know this movie, then you know that this movie belongs to none other than Elisha Cuthbert. And she dared to take the role, and it wasn't an easy part to play. And apparently she even had mixed feelings about it, but later she agreed. And so this movie is hers as a result. If you've ever read anything about this movie, if you were ever so moved to do so, like any movie in this podcast, of course, there's a huge Orphic play here. I would even say that this movie tends to follow the Orpheus and Eurydice myth closer than some of the movies that we've talked about, despite the fact that, yeah, it's an early 2000s teen sex romp. So for our first-timers to this podcast, here's what we do at Tale Oft Told. We look at the big topic that is love and loss, which are two of the most important, impactful human experiences that we get to have in our human lives. And we do this by looking at one of the oldest stories in the West about love and loss, which is the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and how it's retold through modern stories and film, such as The Girl Next Door, in books or other modern media. And if you're not familiar with this myth, although I'm sure you are in some way, since myths have a way of being imprinted into our psyche, let's go ahead and do a quick, brief synopsis. So it goes like this. Orpheus and Eurydice fall madly in love. On their wedding day, Eurydice dies. And so a grieving Orpheus goes to the underworld and he confronts Hades, and he convinces Hades to let him have her back. Hades agrees, but on one condition. And this is the part of the movie that most people, not part of the movie, but a part of the myth that most people do seem to understand or know of. The condition was that when Eurydice follows Orpheus out of the underworld, he's not supposed to look back. And that being the only condition, of course, Orpheus agrees. But as he leaves the underworld through a tunnel, he's confused. He's not sure he's hearing her footsteps or not. He's not sure if she's really behind him. And so he looks back. And he sees her as she's being pulled back into the abyss of the underworld, thereby losing her forever. But here's the fun part. Every Orphic movie does things a little different. It has its own flavor. And those little differences, or big differences, they tell us a lot about the time the movie was made, as well as it tells us a lot about the state of our humanity at that time. And so when we look at how this myth reincarnates in modern media, the first thing we want to always identify is, who is our Orpheus? And second, who is our Eurydice? Third is going to be, what is the underworld? And if there is a Hades, who is he, or she, or it? And despite being a teen sex romp, The Girl Next Door, it has all of its bases covered. So we have Matthew Kidman, the main character, played by Emile Hirsch. He is our Orpheus. And then Danielle, played by Elisha Cuthbert, our Eurydice. And if I had to ask you, what is our underworld in The Girl Next Door? Well, I mean, okay, I'll say it. I could say it's the porn industry. But is it? Maybe it's something deeper. Something of which porn is just a byproduct. And that's desire and objectification. Yeah, that's our underworld. Let's call it that, because I don't want to feel weird like saying porn all episode. And this can go so much further if we think about it this way. Trust me. And really, if you think about it, like in popular media, whether it be reality TV, even anime, it often portrays women, and also men, with kind of superhuman, abnormal, unnatural, airbrushed bodies and figures. I think it's gotten better with our younger generations. I want to give them credit for that. There's a lot of female artists who pose without makeup, who go au naturel, compared to when, I was growing up in the 90s when we had heroin chic. But we so often still find ourselves in a society in which we're being told something is innately wrong with us, as a means to persuade us to consume in order to fix it or fix ourselves. So let's ask the question, what does The Girl Next Door say about its time? Well, let's start by acknowledging that this movie it's very, as I'm sure you guessed, tongue-in-cheek. It's raunchy. It's offensive. But the love story in it is incredibly complex. There's sweetness in this movie, contrasted with utter awkwardness. Moments of sheer bravery, contrasted with human weakness. And then there's moments of loss versus moments of gain. I'm going to say it. This movie is incredibly underrated. And why is that? One might say that this movie, it kind of got lost in the shuffle. The late 90s and early 2000s, they loved their teenage sex romps. Think the American Pie franchise or Road Trip. The late 90s and early 2000s were hyper sexualized. And not necessarily in a good way. It wasn't like the sexual revolution of the 60s. And in the early 2000s, while feminist awareness continually did grow and expand at this time, there still was this, I want to say, kind of an old boys club that were still ready to shame women at every step of the way. For example, this same year in 2004, in which The Girl Next Door came out, an event that if you were alive at that time, you surely remember if you live in the U.S., the singer Janet Jackson, the sister of Michael Jackson, she experienced a wardrobe malfunction during a Super Bowl performance in which she was exposed on nationally syndicated television. Now, despite the fact it was an accident, despite the fact it was actually her male counterpart, Justin Timberlake, with whom she was performing, that actually grabbed the clothing that provoked the wardrobe malfunction, it was Janet Jackson who routinely had to answer and apologize for an accident. And if you think that event was a one-off, the same situation occurred with other famous entertainers like Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. Think about Paris Hilton at that time, who raked in millions for her reality TV, only to be sent to this brutal behavior reform camp in Utah. The Girl Next Door captures this time quite perfectly. So we have the character of Danielle, our Eurydice, and she is a porn star. And porn stars, logically, use their sensuality and their sex to make a living. And so in being a porn star, she is objectified and she is desired. And to be a constant object of desire, she becomes an outlier. Despite having her own dreams and desires, as any human does. In the beginning of the movie, Matthew doesn't know Danielle is a porn star. He just sees her roll up in her Volkswagen Beetle, and she's going to be taking care of her aunt's house next door. And so when he first meets her, he's nervous, as any young man would be, and he's sincere and apologetic. Danielle really likes this. She loves this feeling of this kind of young, naive, fleeting love. And Matthew remains ignorant of her porn star status long enough for both of them to connect as two humans. And when he eventually finds out, he makes the tragic flaw of immediately reverting to treating her as an object of desire. And even though he does this, really, it only lasts for a short moment. He can't do it. He sees Danielle, and deep down he knows that she's actually so much more. Now, in every Orphic version or rendition, every Orpheus must lose his Eurydice at some particular point in time. And for Matthew, it's precisely at this moment that he makes the mistake of trying to objectify Danielle, that he loses her. And for the rest of the movie, he's trying to get her back. But hey, let's take a step back. I want to recognize this one particular scene in the movie. It's where Matthew and Danielle have their first kiss. So Matthew and Danielle, they go together to this high school kegger. And it's where all the popular football players are. And when they arrive, Danielle and Matthew, immediately the football players take notice of Danielle. And in a very cruel move, one of them, pretending to be Matthew's friend, purposely separates him from Danielle to leave her chatting with the ever-attractive quarterback, with whom she actually remains speaking, as Matthew is left only able to watch her from a distance. And this is where the movie actually feels really Orphic, because it's like this is a moment that is that quintessential look-back moment. And the camera, it just focuses in on Matthew at this point. We get to see his conflictedness and uncertainty. And at first he seems sad and defeated. But then we see this kind of glimmer in his eye. And we get to see his transcendence as he boldly walks towards Danielle, breaking through the hierarchy of high school popularity. And he walks up before the quarterback and Danielle, and he grabs Danielle and he just kisses her. And it's right here at this moment that you notice that things are changing for Matthew, or he is changing. The problem is, the fight has really only just begun. There will be much bigger sharks than the high school quarterback that Matthew will have to face. And we have this sense that Matthew's newfound boldness is either going to carry him to greatness or to ruin. Now, if you came to this podcast after listening to Esther Perel or We Can Do Hard Things, then you know that these particular relationship dynamics, the ones that are being shown in this movie, they aren't healthy. But when a storyteller has the choice of displaying healthy relationship dynamics versus telling a good story, they'll choose the good story every time. And so once Kelly, Danielle's fatalistic, wily porn agent, arrives in the movie, then he becomes Danielle's guardian of sorts. He's our Hades. And he's always staying one step ahead of Matthew, toying with Matthew like a cat and mouse. And Danielle is often seen from these lengthy shots across from the room. Again, very Orphic, that look-back moment. And she becomes a prize, one that is elusive and evasive. And Matthew continually has to up the ante of his bravery. This is almost as much of a story of Icarus flying close to the sun as it is of Orpheus and Eurydice. And so Matthew, he must ultimately descend into the underworld. And what is the underworld of the porn industry? The porn convention in Las Vegas, of course. And it's here that Matthew ultimately sees the brutal reality of Kelly, who up until that moment had posed and pretended to be his friend. But he also learns that there's even bigger devils in the industry. What we see is that Matthew becomes increasingly impacted by Danielle's underworld. He gets hoodwinked by Kelly. Kelly even beats him. Kelly slips him Molly. And this all culminates in him losing a very, very lucrative scholarship. He even loses the money that he had raised through a school fundraiser. But despite it all, Matthew doubles down. Instead of fleeing the underworld, he goes deeper into it. He allows it to change him. He trades in his idealism for brutal reality. It's no longer how the world should be, but rather how it is. And there's a real strong case to be made that porn is kind of the way the world is. There's historical studies on how cinema and the internet proliferated really on the back of pornography. From the moment humans developed a camera, hell, from the moments we had paint and a paintbrush, we wanted to capture naked people. And when idealism fails Matthew, ultimately, it's the underworld that saves him. Most modern renditions of Orpheus and Eurydice, they always feature a love that is essentially impossible. Whether the two lovers be from different classes or different family, different walks of life, different times, you just have two people who are locked in their own different situations, like yin and yang. But despite it all, the two lovers love each other. But if there's a chance for their love to survive, well, let's take a look at how The Girl Next Door ends. It ends with Matthew making a deal to make an adult movie of sorts, with the producer who's of greater repute than Kelly, Danielle's agent. And the movie becomes a hit. And he can use the royalties to pay for his tuition to his Ivy League college, covering the loss of his scholarship. He also regains the money he lost in the school fundraiser. And in the final scene, we see him driving to school in a BMW convertible. And honestly, in this moment, I'm going to be honest, I don't like the guy. I really like the original Matthew better. But you get the sense that Matthew doesn't care if you like him now. And that's the point. Matthew is exactly who he needs to be. He's where he needs to be in order for a love with Danielle to be possible. So a part of Matthew had to die to be with Danielle. His innocence, his idealism, his belief that the world would reward the best of intentions, all of that had to be sacrificed. And so it begs the question, was Danielle worth it? Is Danielle worth it? Well, the movie ends with Matthew as he turns his head to see Danielle, and she smiles as she catches his eye. She's leaning against her Volkswagen Beetle. And yeah, in that moment, Matthew certainly seems to think she's worth it. Perhaps that's what makes The Girl Next Door what is really a very interesting Orphic story. Not that Matthew gets the girl, but that, unlike Orpheus, he didn't lose her. He's willing to become someone else in order to keep her. Well, that concludes yet another episode of Tale Oft Told. And if you listen this far, I want to say a big thank you. If you have come to this podcast because you have experienced the ever impactful experience of having loved and lost, I just want you to know that you are never alone. And I hope that you listen to this podcast knowing that, as well as that maybe this podcast is kind of a vehicle to dissect love and loss in a way that we can maybe process it in a healthy way. And so I want to also recognize that, surprisingly enough, the few times that I dare to look at the analytics of people listening to this podcast, a lot of our listeners are coming from overseas. They're not people from the U.S., which is where I live. And I want to shout out the listeners that we have in the UK, in Japan, in Singapore. I'm curious as to what brought you to listen to Tale Oft Told. But yeah, it's just a pleasure and an honor to have you here nonetheless. Welcome. Going forward into our next episode, I am actually, you know what? I'm going to do a series of episodes where let's look at Orphic tales, classical ones that maybe you didn't even know were Orphic. And then I want to ask the question, in the West, is Orpheus and Eurydice truly the oldest story of love and loss? Or can we trace it back even further to something else that maybe influenced it? And so I think that should be interesting. I'd hope that you would join us. And until then, again, you take care. And this has been Tale Oft Told.